Good afternoon and welcome to this ICLG.com webinar on challenging cryptocurrencies, regulating litigation and mastering the coin. My name is Andrew Misner. I am editor of Commercial Dispute Resolution, ICLG.com's dispute resolution publication, and I'm delighted to introduce this panel, which is hosted in association with our Essential Intelligence book on fraud, asset tracing and recovery, the second edition of which came out earlier this year. Hosting this session is Keith Oliver, contributing editor of that book and head of international at London-based firm Peters & Peters, and I will now hand over to him. Keith, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Sounding, ladies and gentlemen, a bit like Jim Carrey. Good day, good afternoon, and good evening. It's a very great pleasure to be here. I do hope, it says on my screen, you're in the show, everybody can see and hear you. One of the challenges one faces in these virtual events is you can't actually see the audience, but I think we're about 140 strong. Thank you all so much for joining us that you can see and hear me. We hope we will give the three of us, each of you, some stimulating discussion and would invite you to comment using the comment section that you'll see on your screens. I do hope this will be, if not the last, one of the very last webinars that we do before we have the pleasure again to meet face-to-face as we emerge from the COVID crisis. And I'll be asking Dan, who's at the bottom of my screen, one of our stellar contributors, who's based in Salt Lake City, to suggest or at least provoke the thought of hosting a ski seminar in Salt Lake City, in his wonderful town, either in the ski season early in 2022 or possibly 2023. Now, I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a Peppa Pig moment for those of you, whether fortunately or otherwise, were unfortunate enough, in my sense, to witness Boris Johnson's moment of huge embarrassment at the CBI the other day. I'd like to take you back, if I may, and I'm not suggesting that anybody in this audience was around at the time. I'd like to take you back to 1944, and I can hear people saying, what is Oliver on? What is he talking about? Well, nobody, as I say, will have been around I think in 1944. War was, of course, raging in Europe and in the Far East, in Japan. The Bretton Woods Conference, officially known as the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, was the gathering of delegates at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, just a stone's throw from Clark, who's based in Washington, to agree a series of world rules. And the accomplishments of that conference were the creation of an International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And the question I wish to pose, amongst many, to my expert colleagues and to all of you, is whether there will, in fact, be a Bretton Woods moment as far as crypto is concerned, or are we going to live in perhaps a Sylvester Stallone-style Drudge Dredd world, relative lawlessness in the financial markets we met by immediate summary justice? Or will there be, at some stage, certainly not at the moment, effective worldwide regulation to deal with technology that, ladies and gentlemen, is developing at such a pace that I suggest that no domestic or international law can really keep up? We refer to the master of coin. Well, are we going to be like Lord Baelish, perhaps, in Game of Thrones, for those of you that are Game of Thrones fans? Master of coin, a financial magician who could conjure up gold to meet the crown's demands and the six kingdoms. Now, I'm going, if I may, without trying to be too provocative, just to give you some quotes to set the scene. Rick Falvinge, the Swedish information technology entrepreneur and founder of the Swiss Pirate Party. Note the word pirate. I will come back to that. Bitcoin will do to banks what email did to the postal industry. Naval Ravikant, the Indian American entrepreneur and investor, co-founder, chairman, and former CEO of AngelList. It's probably, I love this, it's probably easier and cheaper to counterfeit $100 bills than it is to counterfeit Bitcoin. Tyler Winklevoss needs no introduction. Bitcoins are like gold bars with wings. We have elected to put our money and faith in a mathematical framework that is free of politics and human error. Stanley Druckenmiller, the American investor, hedge fund manager, and philanthropist. Bitcoin is like anything else. Note these words. It's worth what people are willing to pay for it. We'll come back to that. John McAfee, no longer with us, of course. You can't stop things like Bitcoin. It's like trying to stop gunpowder. It will be everywhere. and the world will have to readjust. World governments will have to readjust. Bill Gates, no fool, obviously. Bitcoin is a technological tour de force. Jamie Dimon, chairman, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, largest of the big four American banks since 2005. It's a fraud, and worse than tulip bulbs. Warren Buffett. Stay away from it. It's a mirage, basically. In terms of cryptocurrencies, generally I can say almost with certainty, ladies and gentlemen, that they will come to a bad ending. Now, I don't know whether anyone in the audience, and people can certainly post their comments on the screen, whether they are long, short, or contemplating being long or short in crypto, any form of crypto. Very happy to announce, personally, I have no crypto. I did have an opportunity to use crypto, had I had any, having a very quiet romantic dinner in Antigua, hence the pirate, several months back, in a wonderful romantic setting overlooking the Caribbean. I got out my credit card ordinarily to pay a wonderful meal that I had enjoyed. And I saw, amazingly, a sign on the till, the cash till, we accept crypto here. So there I was in a small, not exactly a center of financial excellence, though nothing against the people of Antigua. It's a wonderful holiday place. And in fact, the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, Appeal Court is there, having appeared there several years ago. There they accept crypto. Now, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce our two stellar speakers. First of all, Dan Burgett, BDO USA. He's director of the financial forensics practice at BDO USA with anti-money laundering compliance and fraud investigation services. Dan, ladies and gentlemen, is the real deal. He certainly is the real deal. That's no disrespect to Clark. I'll come to her shortly. He has extensive financial fraud investigative experience, gained over 26 years as a career as a special agent with the Criminal Investigation Division of Music Offstage, the IRS. Cross him at your peril, ladies and gentlemen. He will tell us it from the front line. And Dan will be followed immediately after that by, Dan will speak about 15 minutes from my Clark Flintbar. Clark is a senior policy advisor with Chainalysis. Now, I don't know how many of you have come across Chainalysis. They are probably not a new organization now, but one of the world's best known specialists dealing with a blockchain analysis, dealing with software that enables law enforcement and government agencies to conduct investigations into the illicit use of cryptocurrency and enables compliance for cryptocurrency exchanges and financial institutions. And having done some work with Chainalysis, I can vouch for their technical skills and their tour de force. Now, as I say, each of Dan and Clark will speak for about 15 minutes. Just want to set the scene, if I may, as we go along and throw a few things at all of you. And please do comment. You can't interject in person other than by posting, but do give us your thoughts. Niall Ferguson, probably needs no introduction, professor of history at Oxford and now obviously at Harvard, wrote in his book, The Ascent of Money, money is only worth what other people will give in exchange from it. Look at crypto, look at Bitcoin. Last couple of weeks fluctuated from $60,000 to $30,000, influenced by tweets from influential commentators, or I'd say upmarket car dealers. I don't know how many of you drive Teslas. How many of you have paid for your Teslas in Bitcoin, courtesy of Elon Musk announcing that henceforth Tesla would take Bitcoin for the sale of their cars. Of the 10% of institutional investors who were surveyed by JP Morgan this year, only 10% traded cryptocurrencies, with nearly half labeling the emerging market asset class as rat poison or predicting it would be a temporary fad. Asked her about their personal investments, 40% of the investors said they were active in cryptocurrencies. But this is the essential theme of this, ladies and gentlemen. The SEC very recently authorized Bitcoin futures ETF exchange traded funds. So the question I pose to all of you, has crypto gained institutional acceptance at last? Now, very little was discussed about crypto at the relatively successful, I speak as a Bretton, obviously, successful COP26 a couple of weeks ago. Has anybody thought how much energy, however, Bitcoin takes? I've got some amazing statistics to share with you. This month, Sweden's financial and environmental regulators called for an EU-wide ban on Bitcoin mining. the Swedish FSA and Environmental Protection Agency made the proposal because they're significantly troubled by the amount of electricity consumption. Currently, 1 terawatt, sounds like something from Star Wars, consumed in Bitcoin mining annually in Sweden is equivalent to the power for 200,000 households. And accordingly, Swedish regulators calculated that emissions from the 2 largest crypto assets today is equivalent to, take a deep breath, 100 million round-trip flights between Sweden and Thailand. I don't know why they chose Thailand. Maybe there's a big amount of air traffic between Sweden and Thailand. I won't comment on that, but it seems an awful lot of electricity. In the UK, as many of you will know, the FCA has banned Bitcoin to UK investors, although one can still buy them as derivatives overboard. And the FCA has estimated the number of consumers holding crypto, not including anybody obviously on this webinar, has risen to about 2.3 million people. I don't know where to get these statistics from 3.9% in 2020, June 2020 last year, to 4% of adults in the UK in June 2021. Bank of England has warned that digital currencies could trigger a financial meltdown if governments do not regulate the sector. But of course, like everything, depends whether you're buying or selling. I had a very irritating, as a personal cri de coeur, email from Transport for London, who tend to like emailing me and no doubt thousands of others at 5 o'clock in the morning about my Transport for London congestion charge account. Certainly, I wish I could pay my congestion charge fees by crypto, save a good deal of time when I should be asleep. Ladies and gentlemen, people, and some of you, and I apologize if you've heard this terribly politically incorrect joke from me before. It is personally my own joke, and I'm not suggesting any of my partners would necessarily agree with this particular assertion. People think that the British Empire, can you still say that? What was formerly known perhaps as the British Empire is dead. Well, with respect, I strongly believe it has simply evolved. Instead of sending our armies overseas nowadays, we send our lawyers. That's the nature of legal evolution in that respect. And I'm not sure whether many of you are necessarily familiar with what I would describe as the land grab reflected in November 2019 when I attended with many other leading practitioners in the commercial litigation field a presentation by the Vice Chancellor, one of our wonderful halls in London. The UK Jurisdictional Task Force decided, and this is unique because this had never happened before, I describe it as a land grab. They asserted, and I'll take you through the thinking, very clever this, that crypto assets are as a matter of construction. So this is what was described as a legal statement, which has now found its way into case law very effectively so as to generate considerable fee income for major law firms. I'm sure cynics on the audience will no doubt acknowledge that crypto assets are as a matter of English law, are property for the purpose of UK development of assets. And I'll just read you the conclusions, which I do endorse in this respect. Whether English law would treat a particular crypto asset as property ultimately depends on the nature of the asset, the rules of the system in which it exists, the purpose for which the question is asked. In general, however, crypto assets have all the indicia of property, the novel or distinctive features possessed by some crypto assets, intangibility, cryptographic authentication, use of a distributed transaction ledger, decentralization, ruled by consensus, do not disqualify them from being property, nor are crypto assets disqualified from being property as pure information because they may not be classifiable either as things in possession or as things in actions. And then, and here's the wonderful, wonderful land grab conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, crypto assets are therefore to be treated in principle as property. Now, what you may ask, has that got to do with anything? Well, everything, ladies and gentlemen, because it means that the English courts, as you know, we are very happy to interfere. This is a generalization, obviously, in disputes that have no ostensible connection with England. If you can find sufficient connection, we have now declared to the world, this has simply subsequently been reflected in important case law, that crypto assets that touch the United Kingdom are property, and we have jurisdiction to deal with them. So you have seen in the last 12 or maybe longer, 15 months, despite COVID, with our wonderful virtual court system that's been so effective here, keeping so many of us gainfully employed, that we are very happy to make far-reaching Norwich Pharmacal and Bankers Trust disclosure orders against persons or persons unknown anywhere in the world, ladies and gentlemen, anywhere in the world. Swiss lawyer once said to me that when an English court makes an order, Swiss judges think it's the Queen speaking. So we are very happy to transport our English extraterritorial orders all over the world against persons or persons unknown, send them to financial institutions, third parties, even law firms, telling them that the English court, leave aside the jurisdictional enforcement domestically, are very happy to make orders compelling third parties not ordinarily susceptible to UK jurisdiction to comply with orders relating to the disclosure of information. Now, certain other countries have tried to create a regulatory framework for crypto, particularly Switzerland. You'll know, many of you, that the Chinese effectively tried to ban crypto in terms of being used generally. Much of that business has gone to Hong Kong. And on the 27th of June, the FCA demands that Binance, the largest crypto trading, cease all regulated activity in the UK. So the question that I pose to Dan, to Clark, and to all of you, in fact, is are we going to see proper regulation, or is it going to continue, which I respectfully suggest it is, to be a bit of a Wild West until there is a Bretton Woods moment? So, ladies and gentlemen, enough from me. Somebody has asked for the case law reference. We'll post that out at the conclusion. Dan, and then Clark, the floor is yours. Thank you all so much again for joining, and let's have a stimulating discussion. Dan.
Thank you, Keith, for that great introduction and for setting the stage for this discussion. I would consider the current climate to be a bit of the Wild West, but I think we're finally starting to see some theory behind the approach of regulators and law enforcement. And I'm going to be focusing mostly on the U.S. Because that's what my experience is based in. Near the end of my career with the IRS, we were just really starting to focus on cyber-enabled financial crimes. We were using chain analysis, in fact, as the primary tool to conduct blockchain analysis. And it was a very interesting time because we were starting to realize the limitations of the information that's available to conduct those investigations. And the real priority was in identifying attribution data that we could combine with blockchain information to be able to understand the flow of funds and identify responsible parties, which then brings us back to using that information for more traditional investigative techniques. And for that reason, in the US, law enforcement and regulators are understandably focusing on the sources of that type of information. And that has brought the focus really on the exchanges, the money services businesses, financial institutions that have the opportunity to capture that information and also are the target under current law, the Bank Secrecy Act in the US, that enable regulators and law enforcement to implement regulations requiring the capture and reporting that information. So I'm going to start off with just a high-level description of the current environment right now. As I mentioned, virtual asset service providers are the focus of regulators and law enforcement because of the potential application of the BSA and related regulatory requirements on covered financial institutions. So exchanges, money service businesses, ATM operators, et cetera. And again, this is because of the need for the capture, retention, and reporting of know your customer information, transaction data that will allow law enforcement and regulatory agencies to perform the data analytics necessary to conduct enforcement efforts for anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism that would otherwise be unsuccessful if you had nothing more than blockchain data to go on. Having said that, though, the blockchain data, as Clark will talk about, is still essential and very important. But it's this combination of that information that will come from virtual asset service providers as well as blockchain analytics that really allows us to be successful in investigations. Especially now that we have the emergence of privacy coins, cross-chain transfers being used by money launderers, illicit exchanges, tumblers, these techniques and providers of money laundering services, if you will, that are out there that make it even more difficult to solely rely on blockchain analysis. So FATF issued guidance actually defining VASPs, virtual asset service providers, and calling for regulations requiring them to capture and report KYC data on crypto transactions in 2019, and last year issued clarifying guidance, including a better definition of what constitutes a virtual asset service provider. So now in the US, I want to highlight a couple of approaches and show you the contrast in the approaches between the IRS, which based on Keith's comments, I think kind of mirrors the approach of UK law, and FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So the IRS in the United States also considers cryptocurrency as property. And that's an important distinction because in doing so, the IRS requires reporting of taxable gains on disposition of such property. And that really creates a huge challenge for cryptocurrency owners, consumers, and also service providers, VASPs, like exchanges, because the strict letter of the regulation of the law is that any disposition can be a taxable event. And so theoretically, any purchase of goods or services with cryptocurrency would then require you to report the gain on that disposition or that conversion of crypto to goods and services, or conversion to fiat currency, and then recognizing the fair market value at the time of disposition. Now that's one thing, to require people to do with, tangible real property and other assets, but it's going to be a really complicated issue for taxpayers, citizens, and financial services entities. So that actually became even more of a present concern with the recently passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in the U.S., actually passed on November 15th, which now has a provision that requires brokers and exchanges to report holdings and gains on cryptocurrency that has to be reported to the IRS through the existing traditional information reporting process. For example, forms 1099-B for brokers, where account holders will have their holdings and gains reported. That's going to be a real problem, because if you think about cryptocurrency and how you have hosted wallets and unhosted wallets, offline wallets, both have to be considered by investors and taxpayers to determine their true cost basis and what their gains or losses actually are, versus what the brokers are going to be in the position to report on something like a Form 1099-B. And that information may be inaccurate, because it's only going to be based on what the service provider has access to. So, for example, somebody could have 100,000 in Bitcoin on account, and they dispose of that asset, and then they have a gain reported of 100,000 when their cost basis, of course, may actually be very different and not available to the brokers. So there's going to be more burden on taxpayers. And of course, this is going to come with the need for financial service providers to help taxpayers with that, with tools and other methods, but it's going to be a burden. And now the good thing is this recently passed act is not going to take full effect until 2024. And that's going to give the Treasury Department an opportunity and the IRS to try to clarify the requirements, maybe establish thresholds, and refine the definitions so that it's not such a complex issue for taxpayers who are trying to be compliant to deal with. Now, in contrast, to considering cryptocurrency property, FinCEN, for purposes of reporting and data capture and transaction reporting by financial institutions, FinCEN's considering virtual currencies to be much like fiat currency. They define the term convertible virtual currencies, and simply meaning that they're going to consider that as, or they do consider that the same thing as fiat currency for the purpose of regulatory requirements on money services businesses and banks under the Bank Secrecy Act. Now, that's been the case for some time, but again, with this recent law that was passed, there is now a new provision that will require reporting to the IRS and tracking by FinCEN of any transaction over $10,000 in digital asset value based on US dollar value. Any transaction will have to be reported by a business that receives more than $10,000 in digital asset value in any type of transaction. And so this requirement's been around for a long time for currency, requiring businesses to file Form 8300s. And this is under Title 26 of the Internal Revenue Code, Section 6050I. But now what they're doing is this bill signals the intent to include cryptocurrency in the definition of currency and monetary instruments that are required to be reported in those transactions. That's going to be a tremendous burden on businesses, exchanges, VASPs, to capture and report that information. And in some cases, they may not be in a position to even have all the information they need to report those transactions in terms of identifying the counterparties and the KYC information. So this is going to be, again, a huge challenge, but also not taking effect until 2024, which would give the Treasury Department and the IRS a chance to further define, and FinCEN to further define things like what is to be considered a broker and what is to be considered transactions that are falling under that requirement. This is going to be important because when you think about these requirements in the context of decentralized finance, smart contracts, peer-to-peer transactions not involving exchanges, and then other types of digital assets such as non-fungible tokens, it's not going to be simple to interpret these requirements for those types of activity or those types of transactions. Going back for a second to FinCEN, and not included in the bill that was just passed last week, but in December of last year, FinCEN issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking in December of last year that included proposed requirements that virtual asset service providers under the existing law, the longstanding Bank Secrecy Act, would have to verify identification of customers and record KYC information for any transactions over $3,000 involving an unhosted wallet, a private offline wallet, and report transactions. So the first part is to capture the data and have it available to law enforcement and regulators. The second requirement would be to report transactions, much like on a CTR, currency transaction report, any transactions over $10,000 dealing with an unhosted wallet. And what's interesting is they're defining unhosted wallet to include hosted wallets, but those that are hosted in jurisdictions of money laundering concern or by financial institutions that are not subject to the BSA in those jurisdictions. Those will still be considered, in essence, unhosted wallets, and in which case these transactions over $10,000 will have to be reported. This even includes transactions involving the same customer, simply transferring crypto to their own offline wallet. If it's over $10,000, that's going to have to be reported by the VASP. And of course, this brings up privacy concerns and concerns for the VASPs and how they're going to implement this. And it's going to be a real challenge. There's been a lot of backlash in response to the advance notice of proposed rulemaking. So we'll see how that evolves. The Biden administration also early this year put a hold through executive order on any new rules that are being proposed, such as this one. So I think it's going to allow it's going to allow the crypto industry some time to respond to this, and hopefully there'll be some more definitions coming out of this proposed rulemaking that will make it more reasonable for VASPs and consumers. One interesting thing I want to say about this also is that, or reemphasize, is that this is something that FinCEN is going to be able to do under existing law. It's under the Bank Secrecy Act, and the way they're doing it is by redefining the interpretation of monetary instrument to include convertible virtual currencies and also legal tender digital assets. For example, central bank digital currencies. So it's going to be interesting to see because that's something that they can do through rule implementation rather than new law in the case of, as we have in the case of the new Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was passed last week. So I just wanted to highlight some of those developments and underscore that the efforts of law enforcement still heavily rely on blockchain analytics, and with things like cross-chain transfers and different types of digital assets, DeFi, that's becoming more and more complex. But thankfully, we have great innovators out there, including companies that have been around for a long time that I've dealt with before, like Chainalysis. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Clark to talk some more about blockchain analytics and investigations.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. And that was a great outline of the regulatory framework that crypto sits in. So again, my name is Clark Flint-Barr. I'm a senior policy advisor with Chainalysis, which is a blockchain analysis company. And our tools are used by public and private sector companies around the world to combat the illicit use of cryptocurrency. Prior to joining Chainalysis, like Dan, I was also in law enforcement. I worked for the FBI, where I was an intelligence analyst. And I focused first on Mexican cartels and then on darknet marketplaces, which is where I got my start in crypto. And I'm very pleased to be here with you today to talk about cryptocurrency because, as my poor husband reminds me regularly, he did not sign up to hear me talk about cryptocurrency. So thank you for signing up, and thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm very happy to be here. So now that we've heard a little bit about the regulatory framework, I'm going to talk about crypto and some of the advantages that it poses from an investigative perspective. And before I start, I should give the standard caveat that the views I expressed today are my own, and I'm not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. With that caveat out of the way, why might cryptocurrency be preferable to fiat, like US dollars or euros, when it comes to investigating a money laundering case? Well, there's just unprecedented transparency in cryptocurrency that we do not have when it comes to traditional finance. And this goes back to some of the things that Keith was talking about, because the majority of cryptocurrencies are built on public immutable blockchains. And this makes investigations involving cryptocurrency much easier. When I was looking at cartels, one of the most difficult parts of doing that was that they used cash, and we had a really difficult time tracking it. And when I moved over to covering darknet markets, it was just a whole different world. On darknet markets, people pay for the illicit goods and services that they're buying using cryptocurrencies. And so this means that we can use blockchain analysis tools to trace all of those funds. And I was shocked. It's like, we can just see the money moving. We know exactly where it's going. Oh, like, this is great. And so the way that these blockchain analysis tools work, and that's what my company builds, is that you take the cryptocurrency blockchain ledgers, which show the individual transactions. And if you want, you can go online And you can look at a blockchain explorer, and like look at the Bitcoin ledger, for example, and you can see this address sent this much money to this address at this time. But they're kind of hard to interpret on their own, and it would be very time consuming to do an investigation just looking directly at the ledger. I think there probably are some investigators who have had to do it that way, but with blockchain analysis tools, you can take all of that data and it makes it more accessible, it maps it out. So for example, you can take a transaction and you can see, okay, this wallet address sent their funds to this wallet address, and then they sent their funds to Kraken, which is a well-known cryptocurrency exchange, for example. So when I moved over to covering darknet markets, we could look at the wallets of known darknet marketplaces, and we could see, okay, this darknet vendor is cashing out their funds that they have earned by selling fentanyl, whatever, on the darknet marketplace. And we can see where they're sending their money. And because, as Dan was saying, a lot of these exchanges are now in jurisdictions that are regulating VASPs, virtual asset service providers, which includes cryptocurrency exchanges. This means that if we go and subpoena that exchange, they usually have robust anti-money laundering programs in place. So they're collecting KYC information. And if you've ever bought crypto, you have to do this fun, very awkward thing where you have to take a selfie of yourself holding your ID like this and submit a bunch of other information. And as law enforcement, when you've identified an illicit transaction that is going to an exchange and you submit your legal process, you'll get that KYC information. And that can allow you to identify who that illicit actor is. So that can allow you to just crack open a case. And I think another example of where we see these sorts of investigations is really important is ransomware, which of course has been top of the news recently. And we've seen a massive increase in ransomware over the past few years. Chainalysis data shows about a 500% increase in ransomware payments this year alone from 2019 to 2020. And that victims have paid $375 million, I believe, in ransom this year alone. I may have to check those stats and get back to you. But suffice it to say that ransomware has dramatically increased and that it is one of the categories of crime in cryptocurrency that has, it's the most dramatic that we've seen. And the reason for this is that we see ransomware actors employing what we call a ransomware as a service model, where you have specific people who are developing ransomware, like software packages, and they will sell it to other people who then deploy it. So you don't even have to be able to develop the ransomware yourself. You can just buy it and then pick your targets. And so people are buying ransomware packages and then using it to attack businesses, schools, hospitals, pipelines, meatpacking businesses, as we saw this year. And the ransomware actors are going after bigger targets, and they're demanding larger ransoms than they used to. Now, because ransomware ransoms are usually paid in cryptocurrency, this is where the blockchain analysis tools come in handy, because law enforcement can trace a ransomware payment, for example, and using that, they can not only identify the perpetrators of the ransomware, but you can tie one ransomware strain to another and see, okay, maybe has has this ransomware group that used to be called I Am Bad, have they rebranded and now they're calling themselves I Am Good to evade attention, for example? But we can tell that all of the money is still being controlled by the same people. And so they're the same group. We can see what other groups they might be affiliated with. We can see what services they are using to enable their operations, like bulletproof hosting services, VPNs, things like that. So this allows law enforcement and intelligence agencies to prioritize which groups they want to go after and really develop a fuller picture of these groups. And we've definitely seen some important successes here. I think just last week, the Department of Justice seized about $6 million from a ransomware actor. But unfortunately, something that we see more, I think, in ransomware cases than in other cases involving the illicit use of cryptocurrency is that ransomware actors tend to be located in countries and using exchanges in countries that do not yet regulate VASPs. And so when law enforcement requests information, they either don't have it, or they don't collect, or they don't respond to legal process, so they don't have the KYC information, or they aren't willing to give it to law enforcement. And so this is why it's really important that countries continue to implement the FATF standards that Dan was talking about. And I think in the survey that FATF put out in April, they said there were about 50 some odd countries that already had registration and licensing regimes for VASPs that required AML compliance. And there were another 20 some odd countries that were in the process of doing that. And so hopefully we'll see an increase in the number of countries that have these strong AML policies for VASPs, and bad actors won't be able to participate in this sort of jurisdictional arbitrage and exploit exchanges that are in areas that have weak regulation, for example. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Keith, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Yeah, well, thank you both very much. I'm going to throw a couple of things at you, and please, I will invite the audience to post comments as they wish to. Clark, if I start with Daniel, it's not because I haven't got lots of questions for you. I have some pretty challenging issues I wanted to put to you in a moment, but I just wanted to ask Daniel. Daniel, ever since I started, I don't know, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, traveling to the States, I think in the 1980s, you have those wonderful forms where you have to say you're not holding more than $10,000. And I think you refer to this. So does this mean if I've got a digital wallet containing more than $10,000 worth of digital currency, I have to declare that if I have that on my person? Because that could be anywhere in the world. How do you deal with that when you fly into the States? And how's that going to be enforced?
That's a great question. So what I was referring to earlier in the advance notice of proposed rulemaking was going to be enhancing the requirement for reporting transactions over $10,000, with a business. However, while that's concerning transactions with businesses, similarly, the currency and monetary instrument reporting requirement for cross-border transfers, although that wasn't specifically mentioned in that advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, you can see the direction this is going. And I would go ahead and just put it out there that if the focus now is on transactions with businesses for goods and services, it would logically follow that there might be a similar requirement to declare, simply transferring. Although if you think about it, or holding those assets, but if you think about it, it would be virtually impossible to enforce that because, while you can be checked for a bag of currency when you're crossing the border, checking you for a paper wallet or a hash address stored in your phone or something would be impossible. But it's interesting because that's the direction that this is going, is to consider convertible virtual currencies as no different than fiat currency.
Well, forgive my cynicism. Take it one stage further. Suppose, as I said earlier, I don't hold any crypto, but let's assume, which I don't, had a particularly good memory. I decided to memorize my encryption key in relation to the wallet that I have in some other place that's stored in a different jurisdiction. How on earth are you ever going to determine? How do you tax it? I'm sorry. I'm going to sound a bit of a Luddite to this, no doubt, extremely sophisticated audience. I mean, the point really is this: how I suppose in the broader context, there's two aspects to this. How are regulatory agencies coping with the technological developments in crypto and other digital assets, and how much investment is there in that? And particularly putting you, and I'm not suggesting this is your representative of BDO in this sense. If I was a new customer or client of BDO, and I turned up and I'd heard that Daniel Burgett was the leading authority in this area, and I'd like to pay BDO against their services, their invoices reflected for services validly provided, would BDO accept payment in crypto? If so, which?
Well, I think we'd respectfully ask if we could receive that by wire transfer instead in fiat. But no, it's a good question. I think we'll get to the point, where there's wider acceptance in commerce. It's just that, the question is that going to become where convertible, where is that going to be the direction where central bank digital currencies, legal tender digital assets really kind of take over? Or is it going to be this wide array of, 5,000 different types of cryptocurrencies that are out there, and deciding which you're going to accept for goods and services based on your risk tolerance? I think it's going to be, in my mind, one of the biggest developments is the interest in central banks in issuing central bank digital currencies, because if you can think about, we have stable coins now, and there's a lot of interest in stable coins that are going to have more institutional acceptance. And I think another driver would be, going back to the IRS requirement, if you have to consider every disposition of cryptocurrency as a disposition of an asset and recognizing a gain, or you could use a central bank digital currency that could be recognized as much like fiat currency. You could, simply spend that. I think a lot of what you're going to see is adoption of the latter, right? Because it's just going to be easier and less friction for people to use. So I think it's going to take some time before it's that widely accepted.
Well, okay. There's a couple of questions we've got to come on to in a minute. So I'll ask Clark. Clark, you referred to the 50 countries that are signed up and the 20 that may yet signed up. That leaves, according to my maths, about 140 countries that have not done so. So, have you got any idea of how many transactions or percentage of transactions are illicit in terms of the sort of data that you see? And how are you going to corral countries with whom there are no mutual legal assistance treaties where you can't get information? And also, how quickly can you get the information that law investigation agencies and recovery asset practitioners want to obtain for the purpose of tracing stolen assets?
So to answer your first question about the percentage of transactions that are illicit, Chainalysis does a lot of research just based on the data that we have, and looks at what are sort of the trends that we see, and what are the categories of crypto crime that we see. And we publish that every January or February. And in the last report that we did, the 2020 crypto crime report, or 2021 crypto crime report, the percentage of illicit transactions was less than 1%. It was 0.34% of cryptocurrency transactions were illicit. So I think that cryptocurrency has this reputation for being just used by criminals, and maybe, a decade ago that was more true, but now there's certainly been a massive increase in its use by investors and traders, and that is certainly no longer the case anymore. And then in terms of MLATs and how you can get information from countries that are not cooperative, and Dan, maybe you have some thoughts on this from your time with the IRS. That is definitely a challenge that law enforcement faces, and sometimes it's just not possible, and you have to work with other countries that are maybe more friendly with them, but sometimes it's just not an available option. But Dan, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, I think that's a huge concern. And in fact, one of the concerns I know FinCEN is considering is that in being careful with this approach of the additional requirements on VASPs in the US, because the backlash effect could be that a lot of these services move offshore into jurisdictions that are not going to be cooperative through like the MLAT process. And so it's this balance between requiring VASPs to capture and provide this information, or just driving everything underground or to other jurisdictions. In which case, you can say under U.S. law that there are requirements for VASPs to capture information relating to U.S. transactors, but then they're just not going to be compliant. So I think, again, that's where it comes back to. That's why you see the focus on VASPs to capture information. And it's not an accident that in this advanced notice proposed rulemaking, that they're defining unhosted wallets as including those that are hosted by exchanges that are not subject to the BSA or in other jurisdictions. Because if we can capture that information on the side of the exchange that is subject to those regulations, that's going to be some attribution data that law enforcement can then use, because they're not going to get it on the other end. They can at least get it on the outgoing side. And even requiring customers to have their transactions to their own offline wallets reported. That's, again, building the data that law enforcement can use to piece together, as Clark knows very well with Chainalysis, for example, piece together the flow of funds even without the cooperation of the VASP in the foreign jurisdiction.
Okay, well, the questions are flowing thick and fast, and we've got about 7 minutes. So I'm going to read them out, and I'll identify the question, and I'm going to throw them to each of you. You can decide between you which one's going to answer which question. And James Gatto, isn't it true that crypto is not stored in a wallet? The ledger stores info that associates the crypto with a wallet. Isn't this no different to carrying a checkbook with you as you enter a country? I don't know which one of you wants to answer that, but let me just read the other three. Alexander Stanescu, thank you very much. Very interesting. Quick question to Clark. How does Chainalysis deal with interrelated cold wallets where no trace is made to a centralized exchange? How do you deal with DXs and crypto mixers? Are there any new methods or tools? And then Dimas, forgive me, I hope I pronounced this properly, Hanandrianto. Is it possible crypto can be made as collateral or a guarantee? And my wonderful friends Dorothy Sawan, who are one of Hong Kong's leading lawyers, some, no disrespect to Hong Kong in terms of what I said earlier, Dorothy, some jurisdictions like El Salvador are making it illegal for businesses not to accept crypto. Doesn't that make it rife for problems for smaller businesses to have to own a crypto account? We'll be doing the next conference, obviously, in El Salvador, quite clearly. And Andrew asked, are there any new regulatory measures that authorities can introduce to make crypto regulation easier? So, Clark, why don't you kick off first with the question directed to Chainalysis, and I'll leave Dan to pick up the others.
Yeah, these are great questions. Okay, so if there are two interrelated cold wallets, personal wallets, and transactions have been made between them, you'll be able to see that they are controlled by the same person. You won't be able to see who that person is, but you'll be able to see, because of course, like the blockchain doesn't name that person, but you'll be able to see that they're controlled by the same person. And if they have purchased those funds off of an exchange, so like if you bought those funds from Binance or Coinbase, you'll be able to see those hops and be able to see that the funds that are in those personal wallets were originally from Coinbase or Binance. So that could potentially give you some information. And then how do you deal with decentralized exchanges and crypto mixers? So with decentralized exchanges, all of those transactions are also, they're public and they're on the ledger. So you can see all of those transactions the same way that you can see the rest of the transactions on the ledger. And we mark those as decentralized exchanges in our tool. And with crypto mixers, those do pose a challenge for law enforcement. Crypto mixers are when it's a method of money laundering in cryptocurrency where users will send their funds to a service that mixes all of the funds together to sort of obfuscate which funds came from where, and then they will send it out to other wallet addresses that have been supplied by the people who sent them the funds. And so that's a money laundering method. So that is definitely a challenge for law enforcement.
Dan, you've got three minutes.
Okay, I'll do the best I can. First, the question from Andrew Meisner. That's a great question. I think that might be possible if there was some limitation on the explosion of the different types of digital assets and cryptocurrencies. Unfortunately, I think the regulators are going to be continually trying to keep up with the evolution of new types of digital assets, new types of things like DeFi. I can't imagine it's ever going to be simplified because of the sheer number of jurisdictions involved and just the different types of digital assets and how they're transacted. So the next question from James Gatto, absolutely correct. We're being kind of comical with the example of having a paper wallet, and crossing the border. In reality, the comment from James is correct, which is that in an offline wallet, you're not really carrying anything in a wallet, but all you're doing is capturing or recording information, or in the example Keith gave, I have a funny story about that, remembering or trying to remember your private key for your wallet, or your hash signature for your private key in your wallet. That's all that is information that relates back to data on the blockchain. And it's the data on the blockchain that really represents the assets that you hold in terms of crypto. And it's nowhere other than on the blockchain is really where it is. And it's that immutable data that's verified through consensus that really represents the value that you hold. But the funny story is if you don't have that key, you have nothing. It remains on the blockchain forever. Unless somebody can use a supercomputer to crack it open. And there's been cases of law enforcement arresting, money launderers and bad actors dealing in crypto and attempting to seize the assets. And then I know of one instance where the subject said, "Hey, I forgot the key. I had it memorized. I only had it memorized. I never wrote it down anywhere." And of course, they thought, "Well, yeah, you're just saying that because you don't want us to be able to compel you to provide it and seize the assets." But then the search warrant revealed past communications before the person was even aware they were under investigation, reaching out to technical experts saying, "Is there any way to crack this? I can't remember it. I've tried everything." And so, millions of dollars forever locked away because you're not actually holding anything other than a key. Yeah, I think we're almost out of time. Let's see if I can get one more quickly. Is it possible crypto can be made as a collateral guarantee, from Dimas Hanandrianto? Good question. In fact, in DeFi, when you look at lending platforms that are based on DeFi protocols, that's exactly what's happening. You can have funds that are lended and other crypto acts as collateral.
I think you can also, in some cases, I know somebody from my company got a mortgage that was backed by crypto.
Well,
Interesting.
I think look, Legend, we've run to the end of an hour. We thought we might run 45 minutes. We've gone significantly over that. Can I metaphorically, digitally, or in some sort of effective way applaud both Clark and Dan for an amazingly interesting and stimulating perspective on all of this. And thank you all of you for participating. Andrew, thank you, and your team at the organisation for giving us all the opportunity. We should certainly do this live. I think the moral that one draws from this is that if you're going to be a wicked criminal investing in crypto, if you have Chainalysis and Daniel on your backs, you better have a damn good memory to remember exactly how to encrypt, buried away in your own memory cells, the information and the access to the wallet you have, wherever the blockchain may be and wherever you are in the chain. Behind me, the eagle-eyed football fans in the audience will have seen that you have one of my absolute heroes, Eric Cantona, Le Dieu, as he was known at the time that he played for Manchester United with the 7. You can just see him immediately behind me. He obviously has his arms outstretched, looking for crypto assets wherever they may be. And I will leave you with that thought as we head on. And to quote again Jim Carrey, good day, good afternoon, and good night, and I'll be seeing you. So thank you. Andrew, if there's anything more you'd like to add?
No, that's great, Keith. Thank you to you and Dan and Clark for all your insights. It's a very interesting topic, and I'm sure one that we could all discuss for hours, or certainly the three of you could, and I would happily listen. But thank you for your time. A reminder to everyone that you can read the CDR Essential Intelligence book on fraud, asset tracing, and recovery at iclg.com/CDR. And if you're interested in cybersecurity, do sign up for next week's iclg.com webinar on ransomware, which ties in neatly into what Clark was discussing.
My stuff just spoiled. Yes, sorry.
That's a lovely teaser for it. But other than that, thank you very much to the panel and to everyone who asked questions, and goodbye.
Andrew, well, thank you. And Dan, we look forward to hearing the snow reports for the in-person seminar when we get there. Thank you so much.
We'll start planning.
I wish you well. Have a good evening, everybody, and thank you all so much. Travel safe. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye.